World War I didn't just tear Europe apart, it completely rewrote the rules of global power. Today, we're going to dig into how that brutal conflict took the United States from being a relative outsider and launched it into position as the world's new dominant superpower. So our story kicks off, believe it or not, right here. We're not in the muddy trenches of France, we're on the glitzy Gold Coast of Long Island. On the morning of July 3rd, 1915, an intruder breaks into the mansion of America's most powerful banker, J.P. Morgan Jr., and shoots him twice.
So why would someone do this? Well, the attacker was a former Harvard professor, and his goal was simple: stop American money from flowing to the Allies. And his crazy, desperate act really shines a light on the fundamental tension in America at the time. Officially, the U.S. was neutral, but behind the scenes, it was the bank for one side of the war.
I mean, on paper, you had President Woodrow Wilson making it very clear, America is neutral. But if you followed the money, well, the money was telling a completely different story. The country's entire financial well-being had become tied up in the Allies winning the war. And this is the number that had Germany spooked: $500 million. J.P. Morgan and Wall Street had put together this massive loan for Britain and France, the single largest foreign loan in Wall Street history. American dollars were literally fueling the Allied war machine. And here's where it gets really interesting for folks back home. This wasn't just about global politics, it was about jobs. See, America was in a pretty bad recession before the war started. But suddenly, with all these orders flooding in from Europe for everything from food to weapons, American factories started humming again, and it pulled the whole economy out of its slump. So for the better part of 3 years, America is walking this incredible tightrope. They're an economic partner to the Allies, but they're staying out of the fighting. But a series of moves by Germany would soon make that balancing act totally impossible. Now, the journey from neutrality to war wasn't some sudden decision. It was more of a slow burn, a series of events that kept pushing America closer and closer to the edge. It started with a disaster at sea, got worse with a reckless German military policy, and was finally lit by an absolute bombshell of a telegram. The sinking of the Lusitania was a gut punch to the American public. It was a passenger ship, and a German U-boat torpedoed it. 128 Americans were killed. This created a huge wave of anti-German sentiment. For the first time, the war felt personal. But the real final straw came a couple of years later. It arrived in the form of a secret, coded message. British spies got their hands on a telegram from Germany's foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, and what it proposed was just audacious. Okay, get this. The proposal was insane. Germany was trying to form a military alliance with Mexico. They told Mexico, if you attack the United States, we'll help you win back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. When this got out to the American press, people lost their minds. The war was no longer an ocean away. It was a direct threat to U.S. territory. For President Wilson, this was it. I mean, the man had just won his re-election campaign using the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Now, thanks to the Zimmermann telegram, that was no longer an option. Neutrality was officially off the table. So on April 2nd, 1917, Wilson goes before Congress and asks for a declaration of war. But he frames it as something much bigger than just revenge. He casts it as a moral crusade, with this one powerful idea: the world must be made safe for democracy. And that line would define America's role for decades. And with that, the United States flipped a switch into total war mode. The power of the federal government exploded like never before. We're talking a massive draft, the government taking control of major industries, a huge propaganda campaign, and asking every single citizen to help pay for it all by buying Liberty bonds. The scale of this was just mind-boggling. 4 million men were drafted. By the summer of 1918, fresh American troops, they called them doughboys, were pouring into France at the incredible rate of 10,000 a day. You can just imagine the boost that gave the exhausted Allied forces. But here's the thing. Sending 4 million soldiers overseas was really only half the story. At the exact same time, another American force was being unleashed, this one on Wall Street, and it would spark a financial revolution that permanently changed the world. And this, right here, is probably the most important economic shift of the whole war. Before 1914, the U.S. was a debtor nation. It owed more money to other countries than they owed to it. By the time the war was over, that had completely flipped. For the very first time, the United States was the world's bank. So how did this happen so fast? Well, look at the numbers.
Even before officially entering the war, private American investors had already bet $2 billion on an Allied win. But after 1917, the U.S. Treasury opened the floodgates, loaning another $10 billion directly to the Allies. That tidal wave of money sealed the deal. And with that much wealth shifting across the Atlantic, the result was inevitable. For centuries, London had been the undisputed financial capital of the world, period. By 1919, that was over. The crown had passed to New York City, and with it, the power to shape the entire global economy.
So, when the guns finally went silent on November 11th, 1918, the world that emerged from the wreckage was fundamentally different. The old European empires were broken, and a powerful new nation was standing at the center of it all.
The difference between the two was just stark. You had Europe completely ruined economically, politically unstable, and mourning an entire generation. And then you had the United States, which came out of the war with a booming economy, fewer casualties, and more political power than ever before. The historian Jay Winter really nailed it with this quote. He said that America was maybe the only country that truly won the war. Everyone else, even the supposed winners like Britain and France, had just lost so much. It was a victory that felt like a defeat for them, but not for the U.S. This was the pivot point. This was the moment everything changed. America's economic power was now the deciding factor in global affairs. The war didn't just end the era of European dominance. It kicked off the start of what would famously be called the American century. And that sudden jump to the top of the world left the country with a massive, defining question. After 100 years of mostly staying out of global affairs, what was the United States going to do with all this newfound power? That's the question that would echo for the rest of the 20th century, and you could argue it's one we're still trying to answer today.